So this is the second piece of the epithelial and connective tissue lecture. In the previous one, we named this, and just for extra fun, let's do it again. Okay, so remember that it's got multiple layers. That means stratified. It's flat at the top. That means squamous, and it lines the surface. That's epithelial tissue or epithelium. So this is stratified, squamous, epithelium, all three words. Now that you learned the typical naming scheme, I got to throw just a little bit of a wrench in that. There are two odd ones, two weird ones that are on your list that you do need to know that do not follow the typical naming scheme. So let's talk about why and figure out ways to learn them. Okay, so the first weird one is pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Okay, so kind of strange. So let's look at what this word pseudo-stratified. So we know what stratified means already. Stratified means more than one layer, right? So what does pseudo mean? Pseudo means fake or kind of, like not really. So when we look at this tissue, which is this one right here, so free surface epithelium, looking at this tissue right here, we look at the purple spots, those are the nucleus, we see that it looks like there's more than one layer and they're all kind of jumbled on top of each other, okay? But the reason this is called pseudo-stratified instead of stratified is because in reality, there's only one layer. So the question is, well, why do they look like there's more than one layer? And the answer to that has to do with the cells. Instead of all being the same length, some of the cells are short and some of the cells are long. Okay, so they're going to vary in height, but they all connect with the same basement membrane right here. And so because they're all at different heights, as they get kind of squished together, the nucleus will be above for the longer ones. Okay, so the ones that are all long, they'll kind of get squished above it. And the ones that are all short will kind of be squished below it. Because they're all in contact with the basement membrane, really, they're only one layer. But we can't really call it simple because it certainly doesn't look simple. So we're going to do like a compromise and call it pseudo-stratified, fake multiple layers. Okay, so the second word is, the rest of the naming scheme is the same. They come from, they're called columnar because when you look at the top, the cells towards the top are nice, long, big, tall columns. Okay, so you can really see the nucleus here with plenty of cytoplasm stacked at the top. That's what I was talking about before. So this would be columnar, and it is an epithelium lining the surface. And so put all together, this is pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Now, that's the kind of official way to teach this. I'm going to give you a cheat though. The one cheat is for this class, we're only going to be looking at pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium that's found in the trachea. And trachea is the windpipe here that brings air into it. Okay, so here is your trachea. So that would be the location for the pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Okay, and for the pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium, all of the ones that we are going to be looking at will be ciliated, which just means that the apical surface have cilia. So when you're looking at this, you want to use multiple different things. You want to see, well, yes, it looks like there's more than one layer of nuclei, but the nuclei are not creating nice kind of neatish layers. They're not organized into layers like you would see with other types of stratified epithelial tissues. Instead, they all look jumbled and packed together. Okay, so that's one thing that you want to look at, kind of disorganized nuclei. And then you want to double check it with, well, do I see some cilia on there? Yep, must be the pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Okay, so those are going to be found in the trachea, and that's going to, the little cilia create little currents to move mucus up and out of the lungs, to get rid of debris and pathogens and things like that. Okay, that's the first weird one. The second weird one is transitional epithelium. What does the word transition mean? Transition means to change. Okay, so transitional epithelium changes. So you can't call it using the normal naming scheme because it changes. That's what transition means. So transitional epithelium is only found one place, and the one location is going to be lining the bladder, so the urinary bladder. Okay, so as the urinary bladder fills with liquid, so drinking your big gulp, as it's filling with the urine, it has to expand in size a considerable amount. And so you need structural mechanisms built in that allow for that expansion. And one of the mechanisms that's built in is the presence of this very specialized epithelial lining. So the major function of transitional epithelium is to allow for expansion. And here, let me explain how. So when you look at transitional epithelium, sometimes people think it looks a lot like stratified squamous epithelium, but visually looking at it, what is different about it? Instead of having very skinny, very, very flat cells on the top, instead it has these wonderful big fat plump cells, very rounded plump cells on the top of the transitional epithelium. Okay, so the way that there's nice and big and round like that, because generally speaking, when the bladder is empty, okay, so it's nice and small, the cells sit on top of each other, but as the bladder fills with urine, those cells can actually roll past each other, and they can become, instead of more like stratified, they can become more like simple. And then even more than that, they have the ability to stretch the cells themselves out. So instead of more like cuboidal, they can become more like squamous, right? So not only does the number of layers can change, the shape of the cells can change, right? So if there can change and be anything, you can't really name them based on that. And so let's just say, well, they change. And so we call it transitional epithelium. And so when you're looking at this, by the way, for this class, for lab, when you're going to be identifying the tissues, it will always be what we call relaxed. Okay, it'll always look like this, where you have multiple layers with the round cells on the top. This is what it will look like for you. But let me go ahead and show you what it looks like when they are distended. Distended means the bladder is really full and everything's stretched out. Okay, so when you look at here they are relaxed with the beautiful plump cells at the top. But when it becomes distended, stretched out, they get really, really flat. Look how flat those cells are. And they go from all stacked on top of each other to more like simple. Okay, so remember, transition means to change. So what is changing? The shape and the number of layers. And so that is why we cannot use the normal naming scheme, because it's not going to stay the same as it moves. Okay, so where is transitional epithelium found? In the bladder. Why is it lined the bladder? To allow it to stretch. Okay, I'm going to stop it, go to another piece.